And we've seen what happened. We've heard in the news Austria is in this bind about, Hungary is in a bind about reopening rail lines. It's a huge issue there. Even the British are saying, is this the image? They're comparing it to the one of the girl in the Vietnam War covered in napalm. Is this the one that says to people, something's got to change, maybe we've got to do more on immigration? How much impact do you think those pictures will have today?
A huge impact, and I think you're right. They are the equivalent of the girl running down the street, the equivalent of our young Australian boy holding up a decapitated head and so on. These pictures spark the right conversations. The conversation that Europe is embarking on, courtesy of these pictures, is the same conversation that we've had in this studio and in Australia for the last 5 years, which is, what is the best way to confront the horror of people fleeing from parts of the world that aren't as nice as the parts of the world we're in? And Europe's now facing this fact. Europe had an agreement. It was a lovey-dovey agreement where we'd have open borders in Europe. Everyone could come and go. I remember back in 1985 thinking, this is insane. If they open all the borders, eventually so many people are going to want to come in, Europe will just turn into whatever else the rest of the world is, the places people are fleeing. We have a structure within the world which relies on borders. Otherwise, we just accept the socialist dream that everyone can go wherever they want. That's fine. But the people who call for that aren't the ones who want to have the immigrants sitting in
the basis of the EU is no borders. Once you're in the European Union,
it doesn't work, and that's what I'm saying. The Europeans are now going, oh, hang on, we've done the Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard model for the last 20, 30 years, and we are now reaping that. What comes of that is people die. They died at sea here, and now they're dying at sea in Europe, thanks to left-wing policies that believe you can have open borders.
Nicholas Rees, this photo might shock people, it might start a debate, but really when they're throwing up their hands saying we must do something, no one has any solutions in Europe.
Well, I think it's an awful and complex issue, but I really would strongly disagree with Rowan's characterisation of how European governments are responding to this. I mean, and his characterisation as this as being a left and a right issue. I mean, Angela Merkel is the most senior conservative leader amongst advanced democracies in the world, and she has come out today saying that Germany will be prepared to accept 800,000 refugees. We're expecting to see 1 million flowing into Europe over the sort of this 12-month period. Now, 1 million does sound a lot, and we do need to keep that into perspective. Europe, of course, is a group of 28 states which have 500 million people living in it. So 1 million people is about 1/5 of 1%. But nonetheless, 1 million as a raw number is huge. And Germany, led by the Conservative Angela Merkel, I think has done a tremendous thing, saying that they're prepared to do their part and accept 800,000 refugees. Compare that to Australia. We're going to take 13,000 refugees in this 12-month period. That number's been cut by the Abbott government. Mate, so at a time in human history when we need advanced countries like Australia to be more generous, in fact, this country is being nasty and meaner.
Nicholas, you are telling absolute untruths there. You are deliberately trying to mislead people. When Labor were in power, Australia was not in a position to take one refugee, not one refugee from Syria, because all the spots were taken up by the hundreds of boats arriving on our shores with thousands of people selected by the people smugglers. Australia could not take anyone under the humanitarian program because you completely lost control of the borders. And now that the boats have been stopped by strong border policies in Australia, for the first time in years, we are able to take thousands of refugees from places like Syria, Iraq and Jordan. And you know that's true. And you shouldn't try and mislead people.
Okay, well, let's go to the most important question. What should Australia do next? Would you agree that Australia should now lift its humanitarian intake of refugees so we can do our part of this crisis? Like Germany has done?
Actually, Nicholas, sorry, that isn't the most important question, and Australia isn't the centre of the universe. It may be the most important question to you, but it's certainly not the most important question that this panel should be discussing or the people should be thinking about. The big issue is the Middle East is in turmoil. Firstly, just by the by, why aren't they fleeing to other Arab countries, Gulf countries, really wealthy countries that have to import labour and all the rest? Why aren't the Syrians fleeing into these countries? And why aren't the Gulf leaders and the other leaders asking for them to come and opening up their doors to them? Ask yourself that firstly. The Middle East is in turmoil.
Obviously, they're brutal regimes. They're not doing their bit either. I mean, this is...
Sorry, Saudi's a brutal regime. So we wouldn't want to, so nobody should go to Saudi Arabia. Is this what you're saying?
This is the point. Sorry, you don't think that Saudi's a brutal regime?
I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go there either. So what you're saying is basically everyone in the Middle East should be allowed to move freely into Europe, and that would be your utopia, Nicholas. Well, it hasn't worked. It doesn't work. It only works if you control the borders. Now, the key thing is, do you have open borders or do you have some form of border control? Your red herring about Angela Merkel is a complete red herring, because the German government, for obvious reasons that we were talking about earlier, going back to the Second World War, are desperate to prove themselves as a very compassionate nation, and good on them. They should be doing this. But that's a separate issue. If you look around the rest of Europe, sure, they're working out how to confront the immediate problem of the refugees that are on their borders, who are fleeing this Assad regime. But what they are all looking at is going, OK, they're looking at Australia. They're saying, hang on, how have Australia tackled this problem? They're looking at the policies of Tony Abbott and saying, hang on, we've got to start doing that here. Britain are doing it. France are doing it. Hungary. Other countries are all looking at how they can solve this problem, either through the similar policies to Australia, rather than the abandoning of border control, which is what we had in Europe and had here under your good mates Rudd and Gillard.
I hate to break in there just when it's getting very interesting, but we are going to have to take a break. I think this is going to come back in other issues we'll be looking at in just a few minutes. Stick with us.